Welcome everybody. I'm very happy to have Johan Lundin here today as our speaker. Johan is a research director here at FIM and professor of medical technology at the Karolinska Institute. He's a highly accomplished scientist with over 200 publications, more than 13,000 citations, and an age index of 64. At the same time, Johan is also a serial entrepreneur. He's a co-founder of Aiforia Technologies, which is now a publicly traded company, and he's also a co-founder of LensMakers, which is still an early-stage private company. I hope he will tell us more about this.
Okay, thanks, Sergey, and thanks for having me. And yeah, happy to tell a little bit about the experience we have had in both from the research perspective and then how to actually see that you could get some of the innovations into clinical use, which is our main goal. So this both the research and also the companies all relate to the same goal of improving medical diagnostics. And if you make an innovation, you would also like it to at some point be used in a clinical setting. And that is what has been always the goal. So the research lays the foundation, but then if you want to proceed, there are certain things you need to do. And if research is the engine, the company can be the car. So if you want to go all the way to clinical use. So I'll give you some examples. I also have collected some kind of suggestions for what to consider if you want to go ahead and also try to commercialize things. So as Sergey said, I'm going to talk a little bit about Aiforia background and then also about the LensMakers, which are basically also going for the same goal, but in totally different businesses. One is software and the other one is hardware. And then we also have some new ideas for how to go forward and maybe to complete the whole picture, which I will show you at the end. We probably need a couple of more companies to be successful. So one of the main cornerstones in all of this is, of course, the revolutionary developments of AI. And AI concerns the whole society. And I started doing research related to AI already in the 90s. The first artificial neural networks were introduced already then. And they were very promising, like machine learning stuff and making, for example, predictions. It was not applied then to any samples or images. It was basically applied to data. So then over the years, the research was very much related to pathology, partly to microbiology, and those are all image-based. And if you look at image-based diagnostics in medicine, images or what the doctor sees by eye is like a fundamental part of medicine. So typically you have an expert looking, for example, at an X-ray or a pathologist looking at the sample or an eye doctor looking at the eye of a patient or skin diseases. They are all vision-based. So you need an expert with experience who looks at those. And all those are now subject to the use of AI. So we can already now train very good applications for all of these fields of medicine. And radiology is heading the field. There are probably by now almost 1,000 approved certified products for radiology based on AI. Pathology is catching up, but there are not more than a handful of certified products by now, some tens of products compared to radiology. So radiology is heading the field. But also these other fields are catching up. And if you think of the whole globally before AI, like probably at least 7 to 8 billion of these visual interpretations are done. So if we start to replace those by AI, there is like a huge task to accomplish. We have mostly been looking at pathology and also microbiology. And if we think of the start of this, the Aiforia company, that was actually started not based on related to AI, but digitization of sample, which is the first step before you can apply any AI. So this is what we've done already 2003. We started together with my brother Mika, we started to develop tools for visualizing this microscopy, digitized microscopy samples. And they are special because a digital microscopy sample is huge compared to basically all other images in medicine. So you need to see an overview, but you also need to zoom in all the way to cellular detail. So that was like a technical challenge that we managed to solve by using software developed in the satellite and aerial imaging industry. So we adapted that and it worked really fine for microscopy images, because in a map or satellite image is the same thing. You have basically the whole globe, and then you need to zoom in on detail. So same thing in a microscopy sample. So we developed that software, we called it web microscope by then, and that was also then used to start with. It was used in teaching and in seminars and similar. And it became very popular, and by now I think it's web microscope currently operated by Aiforia is used in all medical universities in Finland and also in many Nordic countries and elsewhere. So that was like the basic, but that was visualization. So we already then thought about the company, and we actually had this analysis made by experts, and the outcome of that analysis was go or no go to form a company. And the answer at that point was no go. So the recommendation from the consultants were that there would not be enough a market for, let's say, teaching tools and those kind of tools. So, but that was early times. But then time went on, and in 2013, so 10 years later, we already then were here at FIM, and FIM was founded a couple of years before that. And then this Kari Pitkänen, who you see on the right, he was working for FIM, and he had made a successful exit. He had a company called FinScience that was sold to Thermo Fisher, and he then worked at FIM also as partly as like an innovation consultant, and he encouraged me and Mikke to really now look into possibilities of commercializing. So we created this spin-off then at that point called Fimmic, so Fim microscopy. And the first customers were again for education and also for quality assurance. So we prepared this kind of, the companies that perform quality assurance of laboratories, they need also this kind of digital visualization of samples. So, and we then at that same time point, we did a lot to get this software from the university and the university hospital where we had been working. So to get the rights moved from university and university hospital to the company. And that was not an easy task, actually. And fortunately, nowadays, HIS has processes for that. But at that point, we actually had to pay quite a substantial amount to get the rights, especially getting it from the hospital side, because I had been working part-time for the hospital. So that already, they claimed rights to web microscope by then. but we managed to get it. Then it was transferred to Fimmic. And then with the help of Kari and his colleagues, most of them from FinScience that had made a successful exit, they came in as business angels and provided funding investments for the first start of Fimmic. So that was, by then it was €500,000, which for us was really a lot. So we thought it was already, that was like a success. And these guys also came in with all their experience. So when you look for example for first investments, you should look for people that have experience to bring to you, not only the money, but also the experience from this. In this case, it was like a biotech experience. So that was a crucial step. But then, of course, you need to give away shares to those investors. And that is then based on the valuation of the company. I can't exactly remember what the valuation was at that point, but it was still a substantial part that these guys got when they invested. Then the next step was, of course, and this is really crucial, is to find a good team. That's absolutely crucial for you as an entrepreneur. We were fortunate to have already Kari, who had started together with us. We found, again, 2 other persons. Again, they were connected. They had also Kaisa Elminen and Mikael Jäskeläinen, and they had both worked for FinScience. So the circles are quite like small, but then they are really crucial because these people, they knew each other from before, which always helps also. So they kind of moved from from enzymes to a software, medical software company. So, but that worked really fine, and Kaisa was absolutely crucial as the CEO. She actually built the company in practice. Of course, together with a small team like that, everyone does everything. So there are not any clear roles, but still Kaisa was instrumental in that. So then we had the web microscope as the basis, the visualization of microscopy images, and we even developed also these display systems that also originated actually at FIM. The actual use of the software for these big screens, multi-touch big screens, was from FIM, but that was also transferred to the Fimmic company. But then, of course, then came the new dawn of AI. I had done research on AI in the 90s, but then 2012 came deep learning into images, which absolutely was revolutionizing what was possible to do with image analysis. So this, I don't go into the technical details, but the so-called deep learning was kind of then the main thing because that's the natural way. When we have digital images, we can visualize them. Then, of course, we want to analyze them and to create tools for an analysis. But to do this, of course, you need very good technical knowledge about the deep learning, machine learning. And then we searched for quite a long time, but then we found these 2 guys, Tuomas Ropponen and Juha Reunanen, which had been working for separate companies, but they were absolutely top-notch skilled in this machine learning. So they managed then to create the actual software that could be then enabling us to do AI on the images. And these guys have been all throughout the Aiforia. Juha Reunanen is still working for Aiforia. Tuomas Ropponen is a consultant nowadays for Aiforia, but he was for a very long time Chief Technical Officer. So then when we had these visualization tools and we had the AI, then we went for looking for a bigger round of investments. And then through actually some contacts and through Slush, which you are familiar with, the Slush event, and through actually some other Finnish startup companies, there was a Chinese investor, Monita Mo, who for some reason she found us, and we met with her in Helsinki, and then she got really interested, and she decided to invest 4.5 million euro in the company, which was, again, that was like the first A round, and that was the main foundation for going further. So that was really fantastic. She also invested in, I think, 3 or 4 other Finnish companies in totally different fields. So some related to automobile industry, and yeah, very diverse investments. And actually before this, we had hundreds and hundreds of hours of discussions with different investors. So I don't know how many hours and how many pitches I had given before this. And some of them we met multiple times over and over again, but it never led anywhere. We got a lot of feedback, but yes, it didn't materialize. But then Monita Mo, after there was not actually many meetings before she decided she will invest. So you need to prepare for you need to talk to so many people before you can actually achieve something like that. And then when we got the bigger investment, we also decided Fimmic was too close to Fim as a name, and it was many times mixed. So then someone came up with this Aiforia AI for image analysis, and that was then the name of the company after that. And then with the funding, with the investments, it started to grow. So then suddenly 5 people became 15, and then 25, and so on. So then it was possible to grow the company. And that was also needed. A very large proportion of these people were either researchers with PhD level, or they were technical people working for the R&D team, and many times both. And this team then put together the first product of Aiforia, which is called Aiforia Create. And Aiforia Create is still the main tool when you want to develop a new AI for a certain task. So it's like a cloud-based platform which you can, without using any coding, you can, as an expert, you can develop a new AI for a certain task. You need the images, you need your knowledge, and you can use this tool, which is like a browser-based tool to develop. And that tool is still one of the real true foundation of Aiforia. And it has improved a lot now. Just a couple of months ago, the whole engine of Aiforia Create was changed into a so-called vision transformer. So going from convolutional neural networks to vision transformers, which has further improved the accuracy of the AI that you can develop. And then the Aiforia started to create a large number of AI applications, mainly as a service by then, or the users themselves developed. But in total, there were already a couple of years ago more than 400 different models developed. But these are for research use only. So these are mainly for research, and they are efficient, and they have helped researchers to create a lot of results. And there is already at least more than 100 scientific publications that have used Aiforia as the tool, and Aiforia Create to create the different applications. But then the next move was to see for even bigger funding. And then you could, of course, go to some venture capitalists and try to raise more money than 5 million. That was the A round. So, but then another option was to go public, and that was then done in 2021. So then Aiforia raised in total 30 million euro by then to this IPO. And after that, the company is public. So everything the company does is also public information. So you can find by now very detailed information on the company and its operations. And that was also a really great moment to ring the bell at the stock exchange. And it was also at some point at Times Square shown. And today, it's a listed company. It has roughly 75 employees. And it has subsidiaries in the US and in France. And then also people working for Aiforia in different parts of the world. And a large number of users. And the customers, the big customers are bigger hospitals by now, and also the big pharma companies are using Aiforia. The first, maybe main customer of Aiforia among the universities was MIT in Boston, which was kind of interesting that MIT buys AI from Finland. We were quite happy about that. And here are some of the current both the partners Aiforia has and some of the customers. And the main customers are laboratories at hospitals now. So there are already tens of, especially in Europe, hospitals now using Aiforia. And it was very happy when I started this presentation. I said, I would like to see your innovations coming to true use. And last year, Aiforia was started to be used in Finland also. So at FimLab in Tampere. And then we, of course, hope to, maybe the most famous customer is Mayo Clinic in the US. So Mayo Clinic has been using Aiforia a lot with more than 50 pathologists also developing new tools and also using the certified products for clinical pathology. So now, today, there is like a suite of AIs for certified through the IVDR, so CE marked, IVDR marked products. And this is not to underestimate. The foundation of Aiforia is the technology, the visualization and AI engine. Of course, that's truly crucial. But around that, the amount of work that goes into creating a certified product is on a totally other level compared to developing it for research purposes. So now one of the major assets of Aiforia is certified products, because there are not many companies that have this many, if any company that have this many applications approved and certified. So yeah, so that's the Aiforia story, and then I switched to what we actually have then continued with on the research side. So now there are these excellent tools for image-based analysis and diagnostics that you can partly replace experts by using these tools. But today in the world, there is a huge shortage of experts, and that is really a challenge. So how can we make the AI tools available when in those places where there is a shortage of experts? And that is leads to, this is like a map showing the workforce of pathologists in the world. So red areas means a very low number. And only a couple of countries are considered green here. So, but you see most of the red are in the African, sub-Saharan African region, where there is like less than one pathologist per 1 million people. So in Finland, maybe we have around 40 per million people. So a huge difference there. So how could we bring AI to these regions? And we have then on the research side, we have focused on a couple of applications. Cervical cancer is one. If you look at this map of cervical cancer incidence, it's very similar to the map of pathologist workforce. So the less pathologists, the more you have cervical cancer, because cervical cancer is preventable by screening. But to provide screening, you need experts and you need the technology. So this is clearly a sign that if you could address this pathologist shortage, you could also address this, for example, the cervical cancer incidence, because it's preventable by early detection. It's caused by HPV virus, and you can test for HPV, but you also need the cell-based confirmation of the findings. So there you have the image-based coming in. So it's preventable, and roughly 1/3 of women worldwide have been screened for cervical cancer, but 2/3 have not been screened. And if you calculate that in numbers, there is roughly more than 2 billion women that should be screened that currently have not. So there's a huge number to address. And that is why we have in our studies tried to address this by setting up a new type of diagnostic system that includes scanning samples at the point of care and applying artificial intelligence to find atypical cells. So doing what the pathologists do right now. And this we have studied in studies in Kenya and Tanzania. So we have by now 5 different sites in the East African countries where we have used this technology in practice at the primary healthcare level. So the lowest level of healthcare, trying to show that can you use AI at these settings to improve the screening, for example, of cervical cancer. We have also looked at we already started 2016 with these studies, so we have this year is going to be the 10-year celebration of these projects, but we have also applied to parasites disease in children, so looking after parasites in stool samples. So in total, we have screened about 5,000 individuals with the use of digitization and AI. And here is just to show you what the lab looks like in that kind of a setting. We have nurses taking the samples, we have technician performing a sample preparation and staining, and then everything you need for the digital part and the AI is on the right-hand side, where you see the scanner instrument and then a computer connected to that, through which you can access the results of the scanning and AI. And this can work also over the internet, so we can use that. And we organized 2024 a women's health camp this region, and in just 3 days we got 600 women coming for testing. And this also attracted a lot of attention. So in the local national newspapers in Kenya, they wrote about this hospital that is boosting the health through use of AI. And we have since then shown that already in these studies, screening roughly 3,500 women, we have already found many of these precancerous for cancerous lesions. So already this kind of limited study, we have shown that we can, that with AI technology, you can save lives. So that is promising also for thinking of how could you then scale it up to serve the whole communities. And we did also a similar exercise for the stool parasites in children, but I don't go into that now in the interest of time. To build this research project, we also had to build a team. So the teams we have in both Kenya and Tanzania have at some point been tens of people working for the projects and funded, of course, by research funding in this case. And then this team includes both nurses, technicians, medical doctors. All of these people, they know now, by now they know a lot about AI and how you can use it at the primary healthcare level. And we are continuously collaborating with them. I'm traveling on Saturday again to Kenya to meet the team and to see how to continue and how could we achieve a scale up. Here is similar team in Tanzania at the small clinic outside Dar es Salaam. And then we have, of course, the research team here at FIM and in Karolinska and Uppsala in Sweden. So we have continuous collaboration also within the Nordics. The main goal is to implement and study this in low resource settings, in our example in the East African region. But Nina, for example, is professor at Uppsala and I'm professor in Karolinska. So this has been a really fruitful also collaboration in the Nordic countries. And we have, of course, the technical team with Hakan and Antti working heavily on the technical solutions to this. But then I come to my last part of this is that now we have shown that, yes, you can use AI and you can use it at the primary healthcare level. But if you really want to scale it up, you need instruments that are feasible to be used at the low resource setting and primary healthcare. So the current instruments available, they all look like this. If you have visited our lab at some point upstairs, you see these big machines on the tables, and these are the scanning instruments you need. So we thought very early on, more than 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago already, that we should address this also. We need something improved. And then we, together with Oulu University, Antti was a key person in that we developed this fully functional working prototype of a microscope that's built out of components from the mobile phone industry, and which means that the total cost of the components of this device would roughly be $100. So that we also then published several articles showing that it's possible to use this and you can reach high magnification. But then how could we create a product out of this? And that was then for a longer time waiting until there were some people that had worked at Nokia, then at Microsoft, and then at Huawei developing mobile phone cameras. And these guys, I don't know if you can see, it's quite small, but the guys there, Mikko Juhola and Ilkka Saarinen, came again we had done some experiments already 10 years ago together with Mikko, but then he came, I think 2 years ago, he came again to FIM and said he would like to do something. He had been working now so long at Huawei and he would like to do something new. And then he remembered what we started more than 10 years ago. So then he said, couldn't we start a company and start developing this mobile low-cost solution for microscopy? because he's an optics expert, and Ilkka Saarinen in the middle he's a mobile phone camera expert, so product developer. So then I helped these guys to set up a company called LensMakers, and that LensMakers is now operating in Salo in Finland, in former Nokia facilities. There is excellent room if someone wants to have a startup and needs room, a lot of space. In Salon, you have that space. And they started there, and then we had to acquire a number of instruments in order to start, because these LensMakers, as the name says, it actually makes the lenses for the cameras and for the microscopes. So plastic lenses that you can manufacture. So we had to raise roughly close to €1 million to get the diamond milling machine and all the instruments needed. So it was heavy on investments early on, but still possible to do. So LensMakers has now 1 year behind, and they also provide services to others who need lenses, customized lenses. So they managed actually to be profitable after the first year by selling services. But then to create a product is another thing, and that is what we are looking into now together, also with a close collaboration with Fim, to see how could you actually make a product out of it for microscopy. So that's very early, and we need to come back to that after a while. But then just to start to wrap up this, I think that this image here shows the whole process needed, going from the sample to the diagnosis. And my own thinking in this context has been to cover this whole workflow. So there are still pieces missing in order to achieve that. And LensMakers, I hope, could create a digitization device that's suitable for low resource settings, like a small-sized microscope scanner, and not as expensive as the current ones. So that's one part. Aiforia already has the capacity to enable creating AI for analysis of the samples once they are digital. But then Aiforia is cloud-based, which puts certain limitations, especially in resource-limited settings. Not always, the cloud is not always available in the same way as here. It's often available, but if it's critical for diagnostics, it's maybe not. So that's why we have some thoughts also here at Fim that we could, in the future, set up a company around what's called Edge-AI, meaning local AI, so running AI locally. And that is something we are working on. Then, in order to bring it all the way to the clinics and primary healthcare, we have some thoughts. Those are not as clear as the other ones, but thoughts about creating a company that would provide AI services as a diagnostics as a service. So that is, we have called the project MoMic Diagnostics, but the name at the end might be something else. But this, and there is still, as you can see, I didn't even put it in this image, but there is one thing still missing. And you see that's the sample. Sample preparation is also something, but we haven't had much time. We will in the research look into that more, but you need to have an efficient sample preparation that would not require a big lab. And then this slide was on the edge part, that edge computing has a large number of advantages, because it could be faster, it could be even cheaper, and it allows privacy, so you don't need to transfer data. It can be located in a private setting. and it's often energy efficient. The circle is circling one of the devices we are testing, and that shows how small a GPU, like very powerful AI processor, has become. And the price is also very reasonable for those. So that's something we are talking about. But then I come to some of those suggestions or kind of lessons learned for you if you think of doing some entrepreneurship. So one thing is you need to be prepared to be constantly criticized by everyone who you talk to, because all people have different opinions. No one really knows what the future will actually look like. I don't think, for example, Steve Jobs would have managed to convince people that the touchscreen will replace the true keyboard on a mobile phone, but he actually showed that it worked. So you need to believe in your own idea, although you get criticized. You also need to continuously work on your pitch, the pitch deck that you use to present your idea. That needs to be under continuous development. So you will need to work a lot on that. And you should, of course, listen to feedback, but also keep with your original idea. Otherwise, you might lose it on the way. So, and then very crucial, look for talented people. That's always important. So whenever you meet people at conferences, at FIM, anywhere, think about if you are planning to really start something, you need people. So that's absolutely crucial. And you should be prepared to adjust your plans. You should also then continuously, and once you have a product, you should continuously improve on it. So really talk to people, ask, because it's oftentimes very difficult to understand the true environment where a user is operating. You really need to be closely. You can have an idea that this is something that will work in practice, but before you have tested it, it's going to be a hard time. So you should interview and meet with users. And then early on, especially if you are going into medical field, you need to involve people who know the regulatory paths, the certification of products, and the IT security. You need to have that actually from start. And there are excellent people also in Finland who knows a lot about this. So if you are interested, I can give you some names also for that, but that's really, really crucial. When I present this, it looks so straightforward and easy, but I can promise you that it's not. To be an entrepreneur is also very hard. And even if it looks like Aiforia is a listed company, do you think a listed company is safe? The world changes so rapidly. AI is changing rapidly. The whole environment, the whole field of politics, everything changes. So you need to be prepared to. And there are so many times something could have gone wrong. And here I have listed something. A crucial thing in the early days, we noticed it took some time to find the right people. So if we wouldn't have found, for example, Kaisa Helminen, who became the CEO, I don't think Aiforia would be where it is today. And also, of course, the others in the team. Then the technology, you can have a good idea, but to get it actually working is also challenging, and it still continues to be that. If you start using AI in a new hospital, there are always things that can change, and things can be difficult. So there is a continuous need to improve on the technology. Attracting investors is challenging. It's a little bit like, the competitions like American Idol and similar. You're standing in front of them and then you pitch your idea and then you always get criticized. But that's part of the process. So be prepared for that. But we had some very fortunate moments where we found the key investors. And then finding the market fit, that's of course absolutely crucial. And that is something that is even suggested to be done even before you have the product to see that is there actually someone who wants to buy? It sounds simple, but is there someone who wants to buy the product? Because that's the whole basis for entrepreneurship and businesses. You need to have someone who is willing to pay for your product. Otherwise, it will not succeed. And then, of course, getting bigger deals signed is also a tedious and long process. So that's, and you need, what you also need is a lot of luck. You need to be lucky because just of circumstances that you cannot have an impact on, things can change. And I think in Finnish, the word yrittäjä it's much better than entrepreneur, because yrittäjä means that you are trying, and that is what you should be prepared to do. This was just a short pitch for Helsinki Innovation Services. So if you have an idea, you should really talk to Helsinki Innovation Services to get all this guidance. And they have already now, they were not around actually very small scale when Aiforia was founded. But after that it has grown and now it's really efficient organization. So talk to that. And then the very last is that this was just to show you the process. You need to be prepared that the business, to run a business, you need, if it's a growth company, you need at different points, you need investments. So the first investment is of course very crucial, but you need to be prepared that there will be more along the way. If you found something that a company that is going to be like growing, you could of course found a company that provides services and is not going to scale up, and that is fine. Then you might not need this kind of process, but there are many steps along the way, and the first one is probably crucial. So thanks, and yeah, I'm happy to take questions.
There is first question in the tool.
Yes.
From Caroline. Thanks, Johan, for sharing your experience regarding certification of the Aiforia platforms. These are CE IVD certified for EU uses, but is additional certification needed for use elsewhere in the US?
Yes, in the US, it's the FDA that approves the products. So now there are still, in the US, there are only a handful of pathology AI products, very few so far, FDA approved. But you can also, you can sell products that are so-called laboratory-derived assays. So that can be a faster way to actually also sell. But then the one who buys will also take responsibility for use of the product. So the laboratory that is using. But FDA is definitely the route to go if you truly want to have a certified product for clinical use. And there's in radiology, there are already hundreds of FDA approved products. So I think many of the fields will then catch up. So I think, and then once a large enough number has been established and certified, then the others will have an easier way to follow up. But it can be research use only or lab derived. Research use only is, of course, as the name says, research use only. But the lab derived tests are also one option. Yeah.
Quick question behind front to another meeting, but about the early phase of Aiforia companies at that time. Did you receive any public funding, or nowadays there are research to business funding for Business Finland, or to participate in the accelerators, or how did you
Yes.
starting?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I didn't include it here in the interest of time, but yes, Aiforia went through the whole process with Business Finland, from the starting grant to much larger grants. So I think Business Finland has an excellent, has absolutely possibilities to support the whole process, and it can be sometimes direct support, or it can be a loan, and both are good. They always require also external own funding, typically from investors. So they kind of match the funding in a sense. The percentage can be 70% or 50%, depending on the program of Business Finland. But it's really good, like we did also with LensMakers. I went with them very early on to Business Finland, in the very early stages. And then we talked to them, we presented, we pitched them as we pitched also to investors. And then they are listening, do you have any investors? Then they say, when you have investors, come back. And then again, we did that, and then we started again, and then now there is a R&D program supported by Business Finland for LensMakers. So I think in that sense, Finland is a good environment. The government funding is really, it's a crucial part. Loans can also be a very good way to finance the entrepreneurship.
I have two questions,
Yeah.
a little different. The first one is gauging how Aiforia will do now. This whole process has been incredible to hear. I appreciate it, really hearing it from the big scale, from small to over time. I'm wondering, we're hearing so much of a change with AI and different products. Do you think entering early and getting, especially the IVDR, will place Aiforia in a way that if the strategy now to basically gain as many customers as possible before everybody catches up, and is the strategy different in the US and the EU? Are you going for both markets?
Yeah, both markets, and I think what's really crucial, as I tried also to say, that what differentiates Aiforia from the others right now is the actual number of certified products, because the certification process is so heavy. You need big financial muscles to do that, and a lot of work and people. So that I think is really crucial, and I don't think that process will change anytime soon to become easier. I think even the opposite, because now you can do coding just as like you can be like a conductor. You don't need to be even a developer. You can just even write what you want, and you get the software developed through the AI agents. So probably there will be, Hakan can probably comment on that, but I guess there will be like a huge number of new softwares coming. But the authorities cannot have the capacity to audit and certify all those products. So that I think is an advantage for those companies that have been early on in this field. But of course, the Aiforia needs to follow the developments. And as I said, the whole AI engine was just recently replaced with a new version, and then there will be new versions and so on. So it's like a continuous improvement.
And hopefully the customers appreciate a good quality, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, the second question is very interesting to see the customer base for the second part of
Yeah.
the entrepreneurship in low resource
Mhm.
countries.
Yeah.
In that case, I would appreciate the number of people and the good that is being done. I mean, I really admire that.
Mm.
What I'm wondering is who the customers are.
Yeah.
Governments.
Yeah, that's a very good question. Yes.
It's the same with vaccines.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
other
So
tests too.
the customers there, to start with, one thing is that if you can create like a solution that is truly low cost, you need to have some margins to be profitable. But if you think about the volumes are huge because there's so much people on Earth, and there are so many that could benefit from a screening. So you need to, I think, have that in mind, that it's high volume. It's maybe not high value, but it's high volume. And then the ones who pay probably would be governments, and there could be, of course, NGOs. NGOs, non-governmental organizations, are all the time operating in these environments, and they put a lot of resources into this. So probably governments, partly NGOs, and then maybe at the end, to some extent, also the end user, the one who is, for example, being screened.
Private labs.
Private labs, yes, private labs also. Not, yeah, there is a considerable number of private labs in the region. So, but probably a mixture of those. But it can't be like a high value test. If the test costs a lot, then not in those environments. Here, of course, yes, you always could consider, if you are developing something, to have maybe a high value test. You don't maybe need then so many customers, but if the test is, if it costs $1,000 compared to $1, of course you don't need so many. And there are examples of those from other fields of medicine where you actually charge a very high fee per test, and you can be very profitable. But then you have to have an exceptional test that brings true value to the clinic. But we think, our thinking is that we want to provide good diagnostics to as many as possible, and maybe then the margins might not be that high, but volumes could be high. Yeah, but it remains to be seen. And of course, you need to quite quickly go out and see, can you find customers?
One question, basically related to this question. Have you considered or tried to utilize those lens product just and somehow integrate, or just use with an adapter, just utilize whole hardware part of part of mobile phone?
Yeah, that's we did very early on. That was actually how I met with this Mikko Juhola, who is kind of key person in LensMakers. We did that. We created together with him an adapter that you put on your mobile phone. But the problem is the devil is in the details, and it's you can't like scan a whole sample. Then you can get very high magnification and good quality of the picture of a small part of the sample, but you can't see the whole sample.
Would it be possible to integrate these lenses in microfluidic chips, for example? Is it in tissue?
Sure, yeah. There are
technically it could make like sorting of cells, whatever.
Yeah. There are actually companies that have such products. Yeah, there is a couple of them. So, but our goal is to enable certain medical like cytology and histology-based diagnosis, and that's a little bit different. So that needs a whole area, which was also the starting point of web microscope and Fimmic, was that you have a microscope sample that has such a big area if it's captured at high magnification. So then you need to move. How do you move the sample? Yeah.
Johan,
Yeah.
thanks a lot. Could you elaborate on the relationship between you, your lab, and your companies and
Yeah.
the university? What the institute and university gets from you establishing a company, and how you benefit from the help of the university from the
Yeah,
research?
that's a very good question. And I think early on with Aiforia, especially then before, we were encouraged by the current director of him to start the company. The leadership thought it's a very good idea, and yeah, we should do it. So that was very good for us. However, working partly for a company is not easy, because it's hard work. It's a lot of work, of course, to start up a company. You need to be working a lot. But it's not only that, it's also your roles. Because as soon as you have the company established, your role might change. So then people around you will start to ask, who are you talking for right now? Are you talking for the company or for the academia? And
Did
that
you
is,
ever experience a conflict of interest?
I have tried always to show what I'm talking for in a certain at a certain time, and be transparent. But I have experienced many times that when I have given a research presentation afterwards, or sent an application somewhere, then the questions that have been raised is this for the company? So it's really hard to differentiate between those. And currently, like Aiforia, for example, Aiforia is now, like FIM has a license for Aiforia. So there is a clear borderline, like I can't even, I can't influence that. If the product has a price and the cost is based on usage. So then, but I'm not involved in the decisions on acquiring any of those. That's then other people at FIM who make that decision. So I stay away from anything. Yeah.
Having Aiforia grown up from University of Helsinki, does the license cost less for University of Helsinki?
I think we are kind of probably paying the same fee as others. We have probably some, we have at least tried to get advantages because we publish also a lot. But that also changes because, okay, university has a certain view of you as an entrepreneur, and they might ask, are you talking now for the company or for the research? But the same concerns on the company side. So on the company side, they will ask you, who are you talking for when you want to buy this license? Are you talking for the university? So you will always have also the challenge to kind of justify why should we have a lower cost. Typically, I have argued that we publish so it gets like a PR for the company. But it has been, I can promise, it has been tough also in that direction. So we really don't have that much advantages. So a company is a company. Yeah. It should also, yeah.
Did you also get help from university in securing IP, for instance? From the university? From the university.
Yes, we have over the years got, I think, excellent help from yes. So, and that has improved also all the time. So we have filed over the years also after Aiforia was founded, we have filed a number of invention disclosures, and yes, I have been very happy with that part, and it has helped a lot. We have also at certain points tried to find, together with his, tried to find potential licensors of the patents. So someone who would license. That has also been part of a collaboration with his. So same as for Business Finland, I highly recommend that you also work closely with his very early on from start. So you get a lot of advice, and you can probably get contacts also that can help you try to find funding for that. So yes, it is representative.
Yes, I'm here. But I had a question that I was wondering here, which is a bit on a different topic. And since I'm working at the innovation services, this is something that I frequently see in my work, that inventors are of course very usually attached to their inventions. They're their babies, and then when you have gone through this process of you had to have kind of outsiders coming help with expertise that you didn't have, and then now it's an actual public company. You probably don't have too much of a say about the matters of how it's run. So how did you find that whole process?
Yeah, I think I haven't really had big issues with that part. Of course, you are all the time worried about the company. That is it's basically constant. Depending, of course, on your personality, but at least I typically worry quite a lot. So because you never know, it's easy to also think about potential failures, and yeah, but I have been very happy with the teams that we have built, and I trust them. So typically I have trusted there. Of course, you can have also issues along the way, and there might be some distrust at some point, but nowadays I'm on the board of the board of directors. So I have a certain saying, but I would say it's a public listed company, the people there have a totally other level of knowledge about business compared to me. So I can contribute with something related to the actual technology and the medical use, but being on the board of the company still, I would now, if I would go back in time, I would probably have tried to learn more about business. Having an MBA would have been absolutely helpful. But I have learned also a lot about the business part, so for sure I can help others who are starting up a company, like I have tried to do with the LensMakers guys, and maybe also for the future potential companies. So, but yeah, but it's teamwork, and if you have a good team, you trust them, it's fine to leave it to others.
Yeah, you were of course lucky to find an exceptional team.
Yeah, and that was, but that was also through very tedious search. It was not obvious. What I learned that the people tend to come in clusters. That was quite interesting. I didn't think of that. I thought you find one person that is good at something. But typically, if that person is really skilled, around that person you have others that are also extremely skilled. So that I think is something to think of. Find these like clusters, bigger clusters of people.
So one question. So if you would start again Aiforia today, would you do it?
I would definitely think very early on, as I have tried also to say in our discussions that you would really like to see what is the product, what's the final product, and who will buy. I think that I would do different. I think in the beginning I was more kind of just envisioning that how things would be without directly. We've talked to a lot of pathologists and so it's not about that, but you really would like to have a product that you can see if you can sell. And what like try to have like a first product that actually you would have some customers. Because then if you see someone, aha, this is something someone really wants to buy, then you have hit the right spot, and then you can start building around that. So
Would just get you more time, like faster? Is that what the end of it would be that you're addressing?
yes, and you would be more certain that there is a need that you feel the need, and there's like something that is currently missing and that people really need. So that I think is really crucial. And the earlier you can test that product, and I'm not meaning only testing it technically, but selling it. That is definitely a huge advantage.
I'm really impressed with how much funding and time that was allowed to do the proof of concept and then the development of the platform, then to be able to sell it. You got the funding for each of those stages.
Yeah. And also the market is still evolving, because with new technology, the market might not be there yet. Or the market maybe is smaller, but then you need to be sure that the market will follow, that it will grow. So that's always a true challenge, that you might actually be too early. So if you are too early, then you can have an excellent product, but the market is not ready. There is no one who is ready to pay.